Simon & Schuster Audio presents Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Millennium, The Fall of Terok Nor by Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens. Read by Joe Morton.
In the hands of the prophets. There was another time, Sisko says. It is not linear, his son Jake answers. The 12-year-old boy dangles his fishing line in the quiet water of the pond, rippling the reflections of towering trees, green fields, and the pure blue sky of Earth. Uncounted summers happen all at once for the Sisko, who falters with the syntax of eternity. But it is, was, will be. His father plays the upright piano in the restaurant in New Orleans, as the Sisko first takes his captain's chair on the bridge of the starship Defiant. All within a single heartbeat. The same heartbeat. In the ready room of the Enterprise, in orbit of Bajor, Jean-Luc Picard tells him, "You're laughing again." The Sisko looks down at the old uniform he wears at this moment. The texture feels so real to him, even as it dissolves beneath his fingers and he is in his bathing suit on the beach carrying lemonade to the woman who will be, was, his wife. Still at this same moment. On Deep Space Nine, his mother Sarah stands by the viewport in his quarters, the radiance of the opening doorway to the celestial temple filtering through her hair. Wormholes within wormholes. Temples within temples. An infinite regression. Or an eternal one. The Sisko says, "I think I finally know why I'm here. Why you had to be certain my mother would marry my father, give birth to me." Major Kira stands at her station in Ops and agrees. "You are the Sisko." The Sisko says, "You need me here. You need me here to teach you." The Sisko finds himself in the light space. Around him, Sarah, Jake, Kira. The Sisko holds up a finger, and each of his observers watches it, as he knows they will. The Sisko regards their expectant faces and laughs again. "Look at you all. You want to know what I'm going to say next because you don't know." The prophets are silent. The Sisko thinks of a thing, of a time, of a moment, makes it real. They are on the promenade of Deep Space Nine, and he leads them to the entrance of the Bajoran temple and holds out his hand to them. "Welcome, prophets. Your emissary awaits you." All enter the temple then. It takes hours for them all to pass through, all in a single moment. The last is the Sisko, poised on the threshold of the temple. He remembers his own words the first time he stands here. Another time. An infinity of eternities in just 2 words. An infinity beyond the understanding of the prophets. Until now. The Sisko enters the temple. Not to show them the beginning of things, because that would be linear. He enters the temple to show them the end. As it was. As it is. As it will be. On this day, the day of withdrawal, like a beast with talons extended to claw through space itself, the station stalked Bajor one final time. The curved docking arms angled sharply downward, as if gouging the planet's surface to leave blood-red wounds of flame. And from each blazing gash of destruction, wave after wave of ships lifted from the conqueror's camps and garrisons. 60 years of butchery and brutality had at last come to an end. On this day, The Cardassians were leaving, but they had not left yet. The dark station that was Terok Nor shimmered with the fire of its own inner destruction. Departing soldiers phasered equipment too heavy to steal. Decks shook as rampaging looters forced internal doors and shattered windows. Quark, the barkeep, kicked and fought as the Cardassian soldiers dragged him from his bar.
It's my bar. I can't.
A scowling officer waited for him with a coil of cable. Quark of Terok Nor, you miserable mound of sluck scum, for the crime of rigging your dabu table, for the crime of watering your drinks, short-timing the holosuites, inflating tabs, and, most of all, for the crime of being a Ferengi, I sentence you to death. The sharp cutting pressure of the cable wrapped around Quark's neck ended any chance he had of saying a word. Two soldiers hooked the other end of the thick cable to the grappler on the cargo antigrav. The antigrav rose smoothly and slowly until the cable snapped taut against Quark's neck, yanking him at last from the grip of the soldiers who had held him. Even as his vision darkened, Quark raged at himself for having failed to predict how quickly the end of the occupation would come. He had seen the signs. Another month, he had concluded, perhaps two. Time enough to profit from the Cardassian soldiers being shipped out, eager to convert their Bajoran souvenirs to more easily transportable latinum. He saw the glow of a phaser emitter node by his chin, felt a searing flash of heat at his neck, and then the constriction of the cable was gone. Breathe! Quark choked as he saw who was saving him from the Cardassians. Another Cardassian? Someone Quark had never seen before. The stranger fired at two other Cardassian soldiers across the promenade at the entrance to the temple. Cardassians fighting Cardassians? It made no sense. If he could just get back to his bar. But the stranger jerked Quark to his feet. He pointed toward what was left of the jewelry shop. That way, as fast as you can. The stranger fired blast after blast at the group of Cardassians suddenly charging him from the other direction. Then Quark saw multiple shafts of disruptive energy blast his captor. Alone now, Quark acted on pure instinct. He sped for his latinum. Scuttling like a Ferengi banker crab, he finally reached the door of his bar.
Get down, you fool!
Quark whirled around at the guttural command.
Odo, how long have you been here? An hour since Gul Dukat left the station.
Quark felt a rush of indignation.
You were hiding here when they dragged me out of there? Why didn't you try to stop them? In your capacity, that is, as a duly appointed law enforcement official.
Odo shrugged.
52 hours ago, Terok Nor ceased to be a protectorate of the Bajoran cooperative government. Martial law was declared under the provisions of the Cardassian Uniform Code of Military Justice. And under military law, the Cardassians were within their legal rights to execute you. But they were going to hang me for the crime of being a Ferengi.
Odo shrugged again.
Even the Cardassians are allowed poetic license.
Quark snarled at the shapeshifter.
I hope someone steals your bucket.
Then, three Cardassians stepped into the bar. One of the three interlopers scanned it.
Ferengi. Constable Odo. Step into the open, hands raised.
As Quark limped heavily toward the three Cardassians, he heard Odo step out from cover behind him. The three Cardassian strangers weren't in uniforms. They were civilians. One was distinct from the others because he was bald. The light from the tricorder's small screen flashed a set of colors across the bald Cardassian's face.
This Ferengi's Quark. What setting do we need to kill the shapeshifter?
Quark stared hard at Odo beside him. Let's see how you like it, he thought peevishly. One of the other Cardassians intervened.
Wait. Constable, can you take on the appearance of a Ferengi?
Odo frowned.
If I had to.
The Cardassian then addressed the bald Cardassian with the tricorder.
We only have this one Ferengi. If we need a backup...
The Cardassian gestured harshly with his phaser.
Turbolift 5's still working.
As they stepped cautiously over the torn-down and sparking security gate leading to the Bajoran half of the station, Quark looked up to see a fourth Cardassian, also in civilian clothes, crouching on the second level. For an instant, their eyes met. It was Garrick, the Cardassian tailor. Quark looked to Odo to silently inquire if the shapeshifter had seen Garrick, but Odo was still pointedly ignoring him. They descended 10 levels. Quark began to feel again the clammy touch of panic. As far as he knew, the lower core of the station was the site of the fusion reactors, the power transfer manifolds, and basic utilities. The only way out of the lower core would be back up through the turbolift shafts, or through an emergency airlock. Finally, Turbolift 5 reached its destination. The level beyond the open doors was so dark, it looked to Quark like the void of space itself. A Cardassian pushed him forward, Odo at his side. The deck plates on this lower level weren't covered by any type of carpet. He realized with a sinking feeling it was entirely possible that boundless space was really only a few centimeters below his feet. He decided he absolutely hated Terok Nor. He'd be glad to leave it. Alive, he added quickly in case the blessed Exchequer or any of his exalted tellers happened to be listening in. This long, curving corridor on this level was narrower than any others on the station, the ceiling lower. Finally, just as Quark feared he would fall to the floor in exhaustion, the Cardassian ordered them to turn right at the next intersection. They halted before 3 more Cardassians, all females. 2 were in soldiers' armor, but there was no doubt in Quark as to which female his 3 captors served. She was the one in the middle, the only one in a black civilian outfit that clung, Quark appreciatively noted, to the ridges of her spinal cords like a second skin. The female leader studied Quark, but her widely spaced dark eyes turned to Odo. "Why is that here?" The bald Cardassian's reply was instant.
"I thought we could use him as a backup. He can take on the shape of a Ferengi."
"But can he take on the brain of a Ferengi?" The bald Cardassian nodded deferentially.
"Terrell, we are running out of options. Dukat has left. The station will be under Bajoran control in hours."
Terrell frowned. "Unlikely. In 53 minutes, the station will be a debris field and a navigational hazard. Dukat activated the self-destruct." She removed a palm phaser and without a moment's pause, shot Odo. Lightly stunned, he slumped to his knees. Terrell glared at the bald Cardassian. "Atrig, that thing is a shapeshifter. It could have escaped you whenever it chose. The fact that it didn't suggests it was spying on us. Just see you keep it stunned in case we do need it." Then she turned her attention to Quark. "You will perform a service for the Cardassian Union. If you succeed, you will have time to reach an escape pod before the station self-destructs." Terrell turned her back to him and faced a blank bulkhead. Quark could tell she was operating some kind of small device, for the bulkhead began to move to one side, revealing an extension of the corridor. There was a light source, about 10 meters past the bulkhead. It appeared to be emanating from a door whose center glowed pale pink. Quark looked up nervously at Terrell. "What's in there?" "Nothing for a Ferengi to fear." Halfway to the door, he heard a sudden commotion behind him. Odo. The constable must have tried to make his escape and not been fast enough. Quark chanced glancing over his shoulder and did a relieved double take. Odo was still staggering along behind him, supported by the Cardassian in the torn blue tunic. But now the 2 armor-clad female Cardassians held a third stunned captive, Garrick. Atrig grabbed Quark's shoulder, forcing him to a stop 3 meters from the glowing door. Correction, Quark thought. The door wasn't just glowing, it was pulsating, changing from rose pink to dark red. The surface rippled outward, but Quark knew that the shimmering surface wasn't liquid. It was a solid layer protecting those on the outside from something that these 6 Cardassians didn't want to face. Or couldn't. Yet for some reason, they believed a Ferengi could. Pulsating coils of red light snaked out from the rapidly deforming surface of the door. Quark felt himself pushed forward again by the bald Cardassian.
Terrell, what in the name of all that's profitable is in there?
A lab. What you're seeing is merely a holographic illusion, a new type of holosuite technology. We will open the door. You will go inside the lab, ignoring everything you hear, everything you see. On the main console, you'll see a power unit, a type of power crystal, spindle-shaped. You can't miss it.
And you want me to bring it out?
Terrell nodded at him. Simply disconnect 2 power leads to detach it from the console, then carry the crystal out. As soon as you do, you'll be free to go. A very unconvincing smile confirmed the situation for Quark. He instantly knew that if he succeeded in retrieving the crystal from the lab, a minute later, he'd be as dead as if he were still dangling at the end of a cable on the promenade. Terrell ordered one of the Cardassians to open the door. Incredibly, the door seemed to melt to one side, and Quark squinted as the light level reached an almost painful intensity.
Yes.
Startled, Quark looked around, trying to see who had just cried out. It was Odo.
Yes. Yes. I understand.
The shapeshifter began to reach out his arms, stretching away from his captive toward the blood-red light of the lab. The Cardassian stunned Odo again, and the shapeshifter slumped. Quark looked fearfully at Terrell.
What happened?
You didn't hear them? The voices calling? You do fine. Go, Quark, now. Quark swayed before the open doorway. The light swirls fragmented, becoming writhing tendrils that seemed to reach out for him and Terrell. The bald Cardassian leaped through the air to meet the coil of light that hurled him across the corridor. His limp form crumpled to the deck. Quark ducked as 2 more tentacles of flame-red energy snapped out from the doorway. 2 more Cardassians were lifted up from the deck, wrapped in red light. The scarlet glow spread over them like a hungry wave. Then, horribly, slowly, their wildly flailing arms and legs ceased their struggle. The 2 were sucked back into the vortex of light, disappearing in an instant. Quark turned to flee, but Terrell blocked his way. Her palm phaser was aimed directly at his head.
Hurry, Quark.
Quark stared at Terrell. It was madness to do what she wanted. It was guaranteed suicide. But as much as he hated to admit it, if he didn't do as she ordered, then that fool Odo would be on his feet and stumbling forward in his place. Quark's chest swelled out as he drew in a deep breath. As the old Ferengi saying had it, better the auditor you know than the auditor you don't. Sometimes, he told himself, you just have to sign the contract you negotiated. Quark covered his head with his arms and ran straight through the doorway into the blinding red light. It was raining. The air was sweetly perfumed with the fetid rot of a swamp. Quark gasped as he saw the soft and welcoming lights of the Ferenginar capital city shining through the distance and the dark of night. He looked around, trying to figure out where the lab had gone, where Terok Nor had gone, if he had finally died.
Quark? Is that you, son?
Moogie?
Over here, Quark!
Quark shifted in the mud of his homeworld, and suddenly the glittering diamond was before him, held in his beloved mother's arms. She held out the glittering jewel to him.
Go ahead, Quark! Take it!
Quark reached for the orb like a child reaching for a toy. Everything was going to be perfect now.
Moogie, can I ask you a question?
And as Quark's mother began her transformation, Quark shrieked louder than any Ferengi had ever shrieked. Quark slapped his hand to his forehead, grimacing with pain.
Who designed this franksing bed?
He swung his feet over the edge of the narrow Cardassian sleeping ledge and tried once more to sit up, this time without banging his head. Then he looked around at the Stark holding cell in Deep Space Nine's security office and answered his own question.
Cardassians. Ha!
Quark had had it with Cardassians. In fact, even though the Cardassian occupation had ended 6 long years ago, Quark had had it with this station.
Deep Space Nine, Terok Nor, Federation bureaucrats, Cardassian secret police. What's the difference, I ask you?
He stood in front of the holding cell's force field.
Computer, release the prisoner.
Quark stepped over the lip of the cell doorway and trudged to the replicator, smacked his lips, then punched in his prisoner code for a cup of millipede juice.
Bzzzt, you're dead.
It was Odo, only 1 meter behind him.
Odo, don't do that.
Odo shook his head.
Would you rather the Andorian sisters did that?
Quark waved his hands to include the entire security office.
You're supposed to be protecting me, remember?
Odo pointed to the holding cell.
In there, behind a force field, that's protective custody. Out here, you're fair game.
Quark rubbed at his temples. 20 meters away, just across the promenade, his bar was in the hands of Rom. Engineer Rom. Turned his back on everything Ferengi, work for free, use a pad to total all bills, good for nothing, Rom.
I need something to read. Rom's driving me into bankruptcy and there's no way I can sleep. Actually, the bar has seldom been busier. Rom is treating the customers fairly, so business is up. You should be happy.
Quark couldn't believe the foul language Odo was capable of using.
Fairly. I'm ruined. That's it. Protective custody is over.
Odo didn't let him finish.
It's not that simple, Quark. Please, return to your cell. Odo, you almost make it seem as if you're putting me under arrest.
Odo said nothing.
For what, Odo? Murder? How many times do I have to say it? I did not kill Dal Nortron. The Andorian sisters did it. They killed him. And they say that you killed him. Imagine that. So, you're arresting me on their word, but you're not arresting them on mine?
Odo uncrossed his arms and shook his head.
We've been over this. If I arrest Sator and Lean while they are on DS9 as representatives of the Andorian government, they will file a diplomatic protest and I will have to release them. Quark, listen, carefully. This time you are in serious trouble. 2 nights ago, Dal Nortron won a considerable amount of latinum from you. 2 hours later, Dal Nortron died, the latinum gone. Odo, think about it. How long would I stay in business if I started killing everyone who wanted my Dabu table? Are you kidding? I give the winners presents. I give them unlimited holosuite sessions, even free drinks. I do whatever I can to get them to return to the table so I can win my latinum back. I don't kill customers. Sator and Lean say you had an argument with Nortron.
Quark glared at the changeling.
I have arguments with you, and I haven't killed you. Yet. Quark, pay attention. If I hadn't put you in protective custody, the Andorian sisters would have killed you for revenge. They see justice in rather more simplistic terms than I do. Why don't you just string me up on the promenade and be...
Quark stopped speaking, suddenly overwhelmed by a powerful sense of déjà vu.
Odo, I was having a dream just before I woke up. Hit my head. They were hanging me.
Odo frowned.
Guilty conscience.
Quark started back for his cell.
When is Captain Sisko back? Tomorrow afternoon, if they don't run into any Jem'Hadar patrols.
Odo turned and marched toward his office. Quark held his hand to his throat again, trying to recapture the elusive threads of his half-forgotten dream.
Odo, wait. Can I ask you something? Those last few days on the station, when the Cardassians withdrew, the Cardassians never liked me. Why didn't they kill me? I mean, people like me are lined up and hung, strung up on the promenade.
Something went dark in Odo.
I don't know what you're talking about, Quark.
Odo turned to leave.
Where were you on the day of withdrawal, Odo? You answer that, and I'll tell you everything about Dal Nortron.
Quark saw Odo hesitate before he disappeared through the doorway to his office. And to Quark, that could mean only one thing. Odo didn't remember what had happened to him on the day of withdrawal any more than Quark did. Lieutenant Commander Jadzia Dax lashed out with her boot to slam Worf on the side of his head. At the same time, she swung her sword against his bat'leth to send it spinning out of his grip. Worf put one huge hand to the side of his head, looked at the pink blood on his fingers, flared his nostrils in what Jadzia, sighing, knew all too well was a sign of intense pleasure. There was nothing a Klingon liked better than a caring, loving mate who knew how to play rough. Worf leaped over a twisted railing to land 2 meters from Jadzia.
Do not attempt to delay the inevitable. Escape is impossible.
Jadzia stood her ground, raised her sword. Who said I wanted to escape? Worf took another step, eyes absolutely fixed on his quarry.
Knowing you must lose, you choose to attempt to take your enemy with you. The Huan Du, a warrior's strategy.
Jadzia slammed into him, driving him back until he fell flat on his back. In an instant, Jadzia was astride him, hands raised, fingers scooped in the strike position of a Romulan Death Mach blow to crush the larynx. Worf fought for breath.
You cannot defeat a Klingon with a pitiful Death Mach.
There's more than one way to skin a Klingon. She swiftly brought both hands down to the sides of Worf's enormous ribcage and... Say Rumtag. Say it.
Rumtag!
Jadzia rolled off her husband and stretched out on the floor beside him. Then she ran a finger along Worf's sexily rippled brow. Call Quark and book another hour.
That is not possible, Jadzia. Odo has requested all the holosuites beginning at 0700 for his investigation of the Andorian's murder.
Jadzia nodded, understanding. Once highly detailed scans had been made of crime scenes, they could be flawlessly recreated with holotechnology, and the computers could be used to call out various anomalies with great precision. Does he have any new leads? Worf blinked at his wife.
Why would he need new ones?
Worf, Quark didn't kill the Andorian. What evidence does Odo have? Worf rolled his eyes.
The Andorian businessman Dal Nortron arrived on DS9 last Sunday afternoon. Sunday evening, he won more than 100 bars of gold-pressed latinum. 2 hours after Nortron left Quark's, he was found dead, and the latinum was missing. The Andorian was found dead near the reactor cores in the lower levels. Security monitoring is limited there. Who else would know that better than Quark?
You, for one, Worf. Maybe we should suspect you. Clearly upset by her lack of wifely loyalty, Worf glowered at Jadzia.
This conversation is useless. You have already made up your mind about the Ferengi's innocence.
Worf! We don't even know if it was a murder. Worf's heavy brow wrinkled, and Jadzia could see that he knew something she didn't, and was wondering if he should tell her.
Odo showed me Dr. Bashir's preliminary autopsy report. Dal Nortron was killed by an energy discharge weapon. Odo believes such a weapon would be too primitive to show up on the station's automatic scanning system. Microwave radiation, extremely intense. It overheated every cell in his body, a weapon without honor.
Worf, why would Quark use an old-fashioned microwave weapon when he could have disintegrated Nortron with a phaser?
Phaser residue can be detected for hours after a disintegration, and perhaps Quark didn't want to put the latinum at risk.
So, stun Nortron, take the latinum, then disintegrate him.
Jadzia, Just because I believe Quark is a criminal does not mean I believe he is a smart criminal. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls and morphs, this simulation will end. Thank you for choosing Quarks for your entertainment needs.
Jadzia and Worf now stood in a simple, unadorned room, its lower walls studded with the glowing green emitters of a compact holoprojector system. The holosuite door slipped open to reveal Odo and 2 security officers.
Commanders, I trust I'm not interrupting, but I do require the holosuites.
Jadzia walked over to the constable. Odo, Worf told me that Dal Nortran died of exposure to microwave radiation. Odo frowned.
That is privileged information.
Worf was conferring with me, security operations officer to science officer. A microwave weapon seems such an unlikely choice to commit a murder. I was wondering if there might be another explanation.
I am open to suggestions, Commander.
Well, if the body was found near the reactor levels, a fusion power surge could set up rapid oscillations in various circuits. That's all you'd need to generate an electromagnetic field that could reach microwave levels.
Could traces of such a field be detected after the fact?
Absolutely. Odo nodded.
Very well. I'll send a forensics team down at once.
Jadzia smiled sweetly and continued. Quark and Dal Nortran could have met anywhere on the station without you knowing about it. And if they could have met anywhere, why did they choose the lower levels? What's down there? You answer that question, Odo, and you'll solve the crime. They were called Tierra Nok, literally, the life flow of iron, the arteries of the machine. That was the term the Cardassians gave to the engineering access tunnels that riddled their mining station. But as soon as Starfleet had taken control, and Terok Nor became Deep Space Nine, the Tierra Nok inevitably became known as Jeffries tubes. But unlike DS9's other retrofitted Jeffries tubes, the Jeffries tube on this lower level was dark, cramped, and cut off from the station's main airflow system. Jake Sisko blinked as steady drips of sweat rolled into his eyes. He was now flat on his back at the end of this particular Tierra Nok. The much shorter Nog was crouched at Jake's feet, passing along tools as Jake requested them. "Nog, shine the light here." He pried at the egress panel with just his fingers. To his relief, it came out easily. "Huh, I thought that would have been stuck after all these years." Jake looked back at Nog. "You sure you haven't been back here since the last time?" Nog looked offended. "Why would I come down here?" Jake smiled insinuatingly. "The room, remember?" Then Jake used his feet to push himself backwards until he dropped lightly to the floor of a small stretch of corridor. "Whoa! It's still not hooked up to the main power grid." Nog stuck his head through the wall panel opening and brought the palm torch up beside him. "With the Dominion War, Chief O'Brien's retrofit schedule lost its priority, except, of course, when he needed to maintain critical functions." Jake's eyebrows lifted in surprise. War or no war, it was hard to believe that after almost 6 years, no one on any of the retrofitting teams had stumbled upon this 10-meter stretch of corridor that somehow had been sealed off from all the other corridors on the level. Jake glanced up at Nog. "Aren't you coming down?" The young Ferengi squirmed through the panel opening and dropped beside his friend. "Jake, I thought you wanted to time how long it would take Higgs and Fermion to escape through the Jeffries tube." That was the original reason why Jake had talked Nog into retracing their old routes through the Jeffries tubes. He had decided to put his semi-autobiographical novel, Anslem, aside for the time being and try something more commercial. So the new crime novel he was working on, The Ferengi Connection, was going to be set on a fictional Cardassian mining station still in orbit of Bajor. For that reason, he wanted to be completely accurate about how long it would take his crime lords, Higgs and Fermion, to secretly move from one part of the station to another. Jake had decided to base the tunnels in his novel on the engineering ones he and Nog used to play in. Jake looked around.
I can use this in the story. A lost section of the station. Maybe this is where Higgs has his secret headquarters. Jake, did you ever stop to think that maybe this section was sealed off for a reason? You know, we really have to tell Chief O'Brien about this. Jake patted Nog on the back. And what are we going to say when he asks us when we discovered a lost section of corridor? Let's just see if it's still here. Nog darted past him and stood in front of the lone door. It is. Now, let's go to Ops and... Jake smiled at Nog. And now, let's see if it's still working. It is working! Jake saw Nog's large ears flush. Nog, you have been coming down here, haven't you? No. Well, yes, but not often. A few times. 5, maybe 8, 10 times? When the door slipped open, he heard Nog say, Hey, that's not my program. Jake looked into what had been the most exciting discovery of their childhood on Deep Space Nine, something not recorded on any deck plan or technical drawing, a lost Cardassian holosuite. Nog was already inside the room, standing on a slightly inclined rocky landscape. Beyond him, about a holographic kilometer away, Jake spied a collection of small stone buildings reminiscent of a primitive village. He stepped inside to join Nog, then turned around to an astounding holographic vista of a night sky. A planet filled almost a tenth of the sky. Hey, that's Bajor. Nog looked around the holographic landscape again. So, this must be one of Bajor's moons. But I didn't program this. The two friends looked at each other and reached the same conclusion. Someone else has been down here. Jake shook his head. Pretty dull program. I don't see a single Vulcan love slave. They stood in silence for a few moments, listening to the holographic wind. Jake looked back at the village and saw flickering lights in some of the windows of the small buildings. Nog looked at Jake. Does it feel as if something should be happening? Jake shrugged. It's not on pause. We've got wind moving lights in that village. But Jake, why would anyone want a hollow simulation of nothing happening on a Bajoran moon? Maybe the program's caught in a loop, or the holosuite's broken. He cleared his throat. Room, this is Jake Sisko. Show me my fishing hole. Unlike any other type of holographic simulation Jake had ever seen, the distinctive program switchover of the Cardassian holosuite now began. At first, the colors and the shapes of the Bajoran moon's landscape seemed to liquefy and swim into each other. And then, as if the plug had been pulled on reality, all the colors spun swiftly, dizzyingly, into a spiral vortex that made Jake feel as if he were about to be drawn down an endless tunnel. But just as quickly as the vertigo of that transformation made itself felt, the spiraling stopped, and with a strange optical bounce that Jake could almost feel, the new program took shape. Jake and Nog were standing on a covered wooden bridge that spanned Jake's favorite fishing hole. It was his father's favorite, too, and 6 years ago, Jake had been delighted to discover that this secret Cardassian holosuite could access his father's programs from DS9's main computers. Except, Jake turned to Nog. This isn't my program either. The perpetual summer sun wasn't shining. In fact, the day was overcast. In fact, it was actually raining. Nog confessed with a shrug. I sort of made some minor modifications. The rain makes me feel more at home. Then Jake saw that he and Nog weren't alone. There were people swimming in the fishing hole. Nog, who are they? He stepped closer to the bridge's railing, saw the impressive size and bulbous shape of the swimmers' bald heads. Ferengi? The Ferengi swimmers saw Jake and Nog on the bridge and started waving enthusiastically. Then Jake saw how small their ears were, and he began to really understand. Ferengi females. Two of the swimmers began climbing a wooden ladder at the side of the bridge.
And as they stepped onto the bridge, leaving wet footprints behind, Jake was momentarily startled by the bulky, multi-layered swimming costumes the Ferengi females wore. Other than their heads, their hands, and their feet, not a square centimeter of skin was exposed. Not a curve of their bodies could be discerned. Jake looked at Nog with a grin. Nog's open-mouthed smile was so broad it almost made him look as if he'd just been stunned by a phaser. The Ferengi teenager stared at the two fully clad females without blinking. Jake teased him. "Nog, you're drooling." Nog looked up at his friend. "Vulcan love slaves don't wear any clothes. Where's the fun in that?" Jake took Nog by the arm, tugged him toward the door to the corridor. "Nog, you need to get out more. Let's go find Chief O'Brien." Allowing Nog to wave a sad farewell to the Ferengi females, Jake pushed his glum friend out the door. If Miles O'Brien had his way, every starship, every shuttlecraft, and every space station in the galaxy would be as smooth and featureless as his little son's bottom. Not that DS9's chief engineer minded a turn in space. Perhaps because he was a happily married parent of two young, active children, O'Brien greatly enjoyed putting on an environmental suit and slipping out of the artificial gravity fields for an hour or two, just as he was doing today to float above the Defiant, relatively speaking, of course. In stolen moments such as these, when he could just drift peacefully among the stars, hearing only the rhythms of his own heart, his own breathing, he found those moments truly restoring. But to work in space, in the 24th century, what was Starfleet thinking? To O'Brien, the perfect spacecraft would have everything accessible from within, so that engineers and repair technicians could work safely in a breathable atmosphere. The brisk voice of Major Kira sounded in O'Brien's helmet communicator.
"You still breathing out there, Chief?" "Sorry, Major. I was concentrating on the transionic power coupling. There's not a lot I can do while the computer's working. Which is why, Chief, I was wondering if you'd like to lend a hand to the power transfer conduit work crew. They were almost ready to lift off a hull plate, but then they got an anomalous density reading."
Kira's news hit O'Brien like a shock of transstater current.
"Tell them not to touch it. I'm confident they know enough not to do that. Rom's leading the team."
O'Brien's sudden concern subsided to a more tolerable level of wariness. Rom was one of the best junior technicians he had ever trained. As O'Brien's line of sight cleared the interior habitat ring, he could see the red glow of the fusion reactor's exhaust cone at the relative bottom of the station. There, the saucer-shaped module containing the station's main fusion reactors was attached to the main core. The end product of the fusion reactor, power, was delivered to the rest of the station through 6 exterior power transfer conduits. Yesterday, when Odo's murder investigation team had detected an inexplicable modulation in the output of power transfer conduit B, O'Brien had called for a by-the-book shutdown. Once the conduit was cold, he had assigned an engineering team to open it up and remove all the exterior hull plates so that they could conduct a visual inspection in addition to the molecular scanning. He found he was actually looking forward to helping Rom and his team. There were 3 other engineers with Rom, floating by the top of the power conduit where it entered the lower hull of the main station. Rom was easy to identify. He wore a modified helmet that provided more room for his Ferengi skull. Rom called in greeting.
"Chief O'Brien, I didn't mean for Major Kira to call you away from your important work." "That's all right, Rom. What do we have?"
On Rom's forearm pad, they watched a holographic display of a hull plate scan. O'Brien noted with a frown that several segments of the hull plate's interior layers were mixed together as if sections of them had melted into each other.
"All right, Rom. What possibilities should we investigate?"
Rom gathered his thoughts.
We might conclude the mixing of layers is a manufacturing flaw, or perhaps a power conduit rupture.
O'Brien agreed.
Exactly. So what procedures do we follow to identify the actual cause?
Rom recited the steps to be taken next, to the final step of setting up a portable force field in order to keep any possible debris contained once the damaged hull plate had been removed. Rom and the other engineers proceeded, and as the hull plate seal was broken and the plate began to drift away, Jadzia stood by in ops to grab the plate with a construction tractor beam. As far as O'Brien was concerned, a ruptured energy conduit would certainly explain the anomalous readings Odo's people got from the lower levels when they were investigating the death of the Andorian businessman. When Rom screamed, O'Brien swiftly thrusted in to see whatever it was that had so upset the Ferengi. Dead bodies. 2 of them. Cardassians, crammed into the insulating buffer zone between the power transfer conduit's inner and outer hulls. Their jaws were agape in terror. Desiccated gray flesh still coated what could be seen of the 2 skeletons.
It's all right, Rom. Calm down. O'Brien to ops. There are 2 bodies in the insulating space between the hulls. Cardassians.
Jadzia's voice came over the comm link.
Chief, we should transport the bodies to the infirmary for Julia.
O'Brien looked back at Rom.
Give me a hand pulling them out so Jadzia can transport them. And be gentle. They're apt to be a bit brittle.
O'Brien took hold of one of the corpse's arms. He couldn't see where the dead Cardassian's legs were. He abruptly tumbled away from the conduit, pulling the upper half of the dead Cardassian with him. The truncated body spun around in empty space, and the fate of the lower half was now apparent. The lower half of the Cardassian's body had been fused within the metal hull plate of the station. O'Brien thought that the poor devil must have been caught in the worst kind of transporter malfunction imaginable. Almost an impossibility, as 15 separate fail-safe systems made certain that such a tragedy could never happen by accident, which meant only one thing to O'Brien. Odo had 2 more murders to investigate.